Zoom to work, so he is here. He's just listening through my phone. Um, so we now have three people. Uh,
Yeah, from my perspective, from an ag perspective, I remember we presented the project once, and now we're moving it out of an active farm field into the woods. I I don't want to presume that you'll have where the farmer wants it. I can't imagine that the ag committee is going to be concerned that we took it out of an active ag field and put it into the woods adjacent to the ag where the farmers want it. So again, I don't think this is a heavy lift.
yeah, I believe, remind me, Kim and Tim, from past comments, we were okay with having the new proposed area for, because Seth came to the meeting last time and kind of gave us an idea of where it was going to be. So we had a conversation about it a couple months, yeah, a couple months ago.
Could I make a comment?
Yes, Timmy.
So, of course, if the tower is going in an area that's woodland right now, that does represent a loss of woodland, which of course, us as a committee, we do value woodland because that is actually also can be considered agricultural land. But if that is where the farmer is willing to have it, that's we will recognize that. So I mean, it could be stated that would represent a loss of however much woodland it would clear. But if that is where the farmer wants it, then that's understandable. And also, it wouldn't remove a more. We would rather see it there than in an active farm field, but it does still represent a loss of a little bit of woodland. It's just a comment.
That is true. And just to be clear, it was the preference of the farmer and the preference of the planning board, and of those public that have attended the meetings to date. This was their preference as well because it's hidden in amongst the trees. It blocks the overall visibility of the base of the tower in three different directions, basically four different directions. You can see it's been tucked in. So really, the only chance you get a look is if you're looking straight up the driveway. But again, it's been in the woods. But again, it's basically surrounded by the trees, and the overall visibility was the concern.
Yeah, it's all the same. That's what I was looking for.
Right, right. Because that's right. There was a lot of neighbor concerns about the visual appeal of the tower. So the trees blocking some of the tower. I I believe the neighbors are happier, more content with that.
I sent you a photo of the screen, Timmy, so check your text.
All right, thank you.
Um,
This took us a while to get this engineered, but again, it was it's what the landowner the new landowner wanted, and what the planning board wanted, and the choice. There were four choices.
I
Tim's seen all of it.
I mean, I would say that with Seth being okay with this as well as neighbors, that it doesn't propose a loss to farmland. So I would say that, yeah, I would say that it does not provide a loss to agricultural farmland. I could have that.
Let's say it's not a major loss. And then there would be a little bit of farmland coming out of production in order to build that driveway, but it's not a major loss, as I believe how it could be worded. But before I forget, so that Seth is on board with that driveway.
Yeah, I recall Seth at when he came in person that he was happy with the driveway because he could use it as well to get into the backfield behind the house.
I would agree with that one. Most of the time when you see these type of driveways put in, they actually benefit farming. That was a side effect of windmills. We didn't want the windmills in the middle of the field, but when they put them, the farmers realized that it was so much easier to get trucks in and out of the fields, that there was a benefit for farming just having those roads properly made.
Seth's been to every meeting and went over every plan. This has been exhaustively reviewed by Seth.
And
Yeah,
just go ahead.
I would like to second the Samantha's comment that this does not constitute a major disruption of agricultural land.
Occasionally in the past, when you've had things like this, you've also made a comment that this would allow the farmer to basically bring in money to help their other agricultural operations as well.
Yes.
You could make a comment like that if you wish.
I don't know if that is always easy to say with certainty, but what we can say is does not constitute a major disruption of agricultural and potentially help the process of farming in the land.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yep.
All
Aye.
opposed?
Righty.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us, Jared.
Great. So I believe this is all I need. Now we just appear on the 24th, right? Kim, is that your recollection?
Yes, you were at the ECB last week, the Ag this week, and then I believe the planning board is next. Just double check the agendas, and that would be the way to go.
Thank you
I
so
don't
much,
have them
folks.
memorized.
I'm with you. Thank you, folks, so much for your time.
Thank you. All right. Eric, you have more people here now, so let me just stop my share.
He's on mute.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I got you. I was just pulling up the presentation. All right. So I just have a brief presentation, a couple things at least that I think about agriculture, particularly in the town, especially with a little bit of the background that I have in the town. But I also wanted to just prepare this so we can have a few things to talk about and maybe introduce the topic and any questions. So thinking about agriculture in the town, or really any planning exercise, you really want to establish your goals first. The town has, through the comprehensive plan and the ag enhancement plan, put together, goal for agriculture in the community. The goal that's shown there is from the comp plan in 2021, which is mostly from or like a combination of the different goals that are expressed in the ag enhancement plan. So the town has this goal to regulate, act, support of the preservation, continued development of ag, supporting economic endeavors in the ag industry, promoting purchase of local produce, keeping land and farming.
Just quick question, Eric. Are you sharing something in your screen, or
is it not? Oh, yes, I am. Yeah. You're not able to see, or
yeah, you're not sharing anything.
Sorry about that. Let's try this again. Sorry. All right. This is what I was talking about, reading the goal. Sorry about that. All right. So that's a goal for us for the town. Understanding what the goal is allows you to at least take a frame of reference to what the problem might be. um, or what your opportunities even are. This is something that is done through basically any planning exercise. Just some thoughts, anyways. Opportunities in agriculture. Some of this is from the ag plan or the comp plan. Trying to create more markets for agricultural products or agricultural tourism, bringing people to the farm. Ag processing is something that was mentioned a few times in the ag plan. Technology, whether it creates efficiencies in agriculture production, land conservation, so purchasing development rights, and then cultural shifts to rural lifestyles, people having more of an appreciation to living or working on a farm. I don't know if there's any other opportunities that the committee felt there were for ag. We can talk about this after my little presentation here too. But those being opportunities, some threats to agriculture, and this is probably more where my presentation gets into development and land costs. So solar development, consuming ag land, housing development, consuming ag land, some more macroeconomic conditions that impact farming viability, whether or not there's farmers to be the next generation. And I put over here the image that I like to refer to a lot. It says land, labor, lumber, laws, loans. These are 5 Ls. This is a common refrain for like why housing does or doesn't get developed. And effectively, like local communities have very little control over development costs to some degree. You don't control labor costs, lumber costs, cost of financing the loans. But local communities can influence land costs and procedural costs like the laws. So if you're looking for a local avenue that you can directly impact development in the community, it's good to focus on land and regulatory process essentially. So this is a image of from a book called The Economics of Zoning. It's just showing what happens when you downzone or reduce the development potential of the suburbs. Essentially, what this graph is showing is that you push development out into a more rural or ex-urban area. This is just informative since here's basically the employment area of the Rochester metropolitan area, 45 minutes from, well, it's the Rochester's biggest employer or the Metro's biggest employer, Strong Memorial Hospital in that area. So basically Canandaigua is right there in that area, and you're going to see people looking for housing in Canandaigua who are working in the Rochester metropolitan area. Anytime that communities downzone or reduce the allowable density in suburban areas, it's basically going to push development further into rural areas. And that's kind of what we're seeing. These are the house prices or house price index for the Rochester area. I've seen it go up a lot. Particularly, this is just from 2016. If I had the chart even further, it really starts to spike dramatically. This is the housing inventory available in the Rochester metro area. If this is from the Federal Reserve, if the data went back a little further, you'd see it actually starts up in like 6,000 units per month a few years prior to this. So it's basically dropped from about 6,000 units per month down to 450, 500 or so. So basically a dramatic drop, which is probably why house prices have gone through the roof. This is just to say that the area needs housing to make housing more affordable. And so part of the challenge here as it relates to agriculture is putting housing in the right location to relieve the development pressure on farmland or non-developed land. This is an image of Brickyard Road. There's a few lots highlighted here, but the big important ones are the half-acre lot, 1-acre lot, and 2-acre lot. The half-acre lot, the land value is $25,000. The 1-acre lot land value is $27,000. 2-acre lot is $36,000. So effectively what we're seeing is that as the density is reduced, the land value per acre goes down. All these lots are the same in that they have water, private sewer. They're on the same road, only a few feet from each other. the AR2 zoning requires 2 acres of land. You can see in that one lot, 2296 Brickyard Road, that's a 2-acre lot that basically an entire acre is just grassland. Presumably it was taken out of the neighboring farmland at some point and it's just converted to grass. So it consumes more land when you require 2 acres per lot, as opposed to hypothetically maybe even half acre, and you get less value per acre in doing so. So if a farmer wanted to sell a piece of property, they needed some capital or for whatever reason, they'd get less return per acre than they would under a different condition where you have less or a higher density, I guess. And density is a good thing as it relates to preserving land. I show here the hammocks in green and Lakewood Meadows in red. Hammocks is 200 units in 25 acres, so 0.13 acres per unit. Lakewood Meadows is 330 units and 375 acres, so slightly over an acre per unit. Obviously, they're different products, but effectively just saying if you develop with a higher density of housing, you take up less land for the housing. The town of Canandaigua is going to have housing. The region needs housing generally, but if you can develop denser, particularly in areas where you don't want housing, you can save a substantial amount of land from conversion. Suggestions for how you might implement this. One thing is part of the reason why transportation impacts where people live. If you can easily get to an area, access it, and particularly within like a short period of time from whatever your employer is, you're likely to see it developed or you're going to see development pressure. So make sure that GTC is the Genesee Transportation Council, the local metropolitan planning organization. Make sure that we're then focusing transportation investments into urban areas to improve travel options there, so that it doesn't effectively increase development pressure into rural areas. These are all regional suggestions, if I didn't make that clear. Suggest trying to create some sort of regional coordination so that understanding that the lack of housing in the area is not something that can really be solved by just the town of Canandaigua. It's something that needs to be solved by every community, by the state. So trying to create some sort of regional power or lobby for solutions at the other levels where maybe you might have levers, right? Can the city of Canandaigua absorb some of the new housing demand? Rochester, the city of Rochester, any of the surrounding suburbs there, any of those things that can help relieve some of the pressure in the town of Canandaigua. Encouraging land value taxes, exempting farmland. So land value tax is a way to tax land consumption as opposed to improvements on the land. In doing so, you encourage dense development because people consume less land when they're taxed on the amount of land they consume. So it encourages more urbanized, dense areas.
What exactly is that? Is that like a tax when somebody wants to build a house? Or
A land value tax is a property tax structure that you could see as an alternative to traditional property taxes, where traditional property taxes tax a property based on essentially the improved value of it, or the land value and the improved value as like a 1-to-1 ratio. A land value tax taxes the land at a higher rate than the improvements. So that in like the most pure form, it doesn't tax improvements at all and only taxes the land value. So effectively you encourage investment in the property, so building a house, something like that, because you don't see a tax on it, and you discourage land consumption because that's where the higher tax is. So when community invests in infrastructure that makes land more developable, whether it's a roadway, sewer, water, whenever they increase the value of that land, you see less land consumption in that area, but more investment in buildings or something like that. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
But how can you prevent that from affecting? So if there is more development, the expectation is that the taxes for everyone else is going to go down because now we have more taxpayers. But that doesn't seem to be the case. How can we help suggest laws that when there is more development, the taxes for landowners, specifically agricultural landowners, can go down, knowing that it's a significant amount of of their income that they're paying on taxes.
Well, I think you'd have to develop in a pattern that is more fiscally conscious, let's say. So for instance, if you put in, you know, a few 100 feet of water line, that has to be replaced at that level. And so what really the cost is to residents, I guess, is like how many residents, the per capita cost of payers on that extension, right? So if you can fit more people onto that infrastructure, the per capita cost is lower. So on a town-wide level, you could take that further and say where you have infrastructure is essentially where you want to see denser development because people pay less per foot of infrastructure in that case, or in the case of like fire districts, you know, the amount of coverage per person, per payer, I guess. So you're really just trying to fit more people in there. There's some other ways, like as it relates to school taxes, like finding apartments generally have less people who consume school services, but they still pay the tax. Same with housing for seniors. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Like there are different things as it relates to like fiscal improvements or fiscal zoning and development that change that kind of like the calculus of like returns based on investments.
Just trying to go back to your suggestion of taxing the land instead of the improvement, and I can see that as a potential big issue for anyone that has acreage that is being used. Anyone that has acreage, right? If you tax the land instead of the improvement, anyone that is trying to develop land for agriculture or using land for agriculture or purchasing land for agriculture will have a much higher cost of entry into the business. So that there is going to be less agriculture coming into the town.
Are you able to see my screen? It says exempting farmland is the reason I ask. I agree with you.
Yeah, but how do you define farmland? Is it active farmland, potential farmland? I mean, that's where I'm coming from, right? There is land that is idle right now, either because someone cannot afford to farm it or because there hasn't been an incentive to it. So at what point do you classify it as ag land?
I think you could also do it by like a district, essentially, by a geographic district, if you really wanted to. But yeah, I understand your point. I think that you could solve that problem. The incentive structure of the taxes still remains that you encourage a more efficient use of land generally while not taxing improvements and encouraging investment. And recapture of value that's put in place by infrastructure investment from the local community. But I do understand your point. I do agree. You know, as it relates to farmland, you don't necessarily want to tax land because that's your main asset. That's why you would exempt farmland from the land value tax. However, you ended up structuring it.
I just want to make sure that we don't spend too much energy focusing on density and then we discourage new farmers or small farmers or people that don't have the volume to classify it as ag land, but they're trying to do something with their 5-acre lot, right? If we're going to bring more people, the hope is that the residents that have been paying the tax bill can get a break.
Yeah.
And some of that taxes can go to the new people, but if we structure it so that the new people don't pay as much taxes because they have a smaller lot, then we're not really creating relief for the people that have been taking the bill for a long time.
I might have missed part of that. I would say I understand where you're coming from, that you want to focus on maybe smaller new entrants to farming. In the town of Canandaigua, it would probably make the most sense to have some sort of district if you were going to pursue a land value tax. Land value taxes are certainly more appropriate for urbanizing or urbanized areas like the city of Canandaigua or like a surrounding area in the town, uptown. Yeah, I certainly wouldn't say that it's something you would do town-wide. And I think that maybe we can have a conversation. I think it's an important question of how, if my slides and what I put together are focusing too heavily on some topic, just having a broader conversation of things that I'm missing or questions that you want to have, that I can talk about a little bit. I think though.
Now
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I'm saying this is good to understand all the options, and it's definitely good to understand that it can be just by sections, and we can potentially exclude everything that is being on the ag land protection program or things like that. I definitely want to learn more, and I wanted to be there. I'm just an hour and a half behind the schedule, so I'm gonna be driving through Cohocton, and I'm gonna lose signal soon. But
Yeah.
I definitely like the idea of, okay, it can be suggested that this is localized, so that there is a much bigger incentive to develop where we want development. So that starts making sense to me.
Yeah. Okay. And so those things, I guess I skipped one. If solar is an issue, encouraging development of alternative energy infrastructure that's competitor to solar, nuclear, wind, battery energy. At the local level, things that you all have a bit more control over, the town maybe has more control over. So if you were doing ag zoning, 2 acres is not enough to preserve agriculture. It's more likely to create sort of the parcelization of ag. If you wanted to do something like that, either increase the lot size of the AR2 substantially, 10 acres more, or reduce it so that when there is development, it doesn't consume as much land. To your point about encouraging maybe small farmers, or people who maybe purchase small-ish pieces of land. The goal, I think, partly is to provide alternatives, financially feasible alternative choices for people who might otherwise be in the market for that land. So that basically you have less people chasing one of those pieces of property when it does come up, because there are other cheaper options for people looking for a house.
That makes sense.
So again, I think a lot of the town zoning, if I remember correctly, it's, at its smallest is 10,000 square feet, except for maybe in the form-based code area, but reduce it. That's a pretty good size piece, especially in areas where you want to see development or in areas that are already developed. I'm not going to address kind of the political question about whether or not it makes sense or whether the people will go for it in those areas. Just saying, as it relates to removing pressure on agriculture, that's what you would want to do. Seeker, just as removing procedural hurdles. If you can develop or adopt locally designated type 2 actions. So effectively you're narrowing the seeker review on those projects. You could potentially identify and adopt type 2 actions in areas where it makes more sense to develop. Alternatively, you could adopt locally designated type 1 actions to make development of agricultural lands subject to more review. I didn't put it on here. I just kind of thought that, but as long as the list of actions or of what you're thinking of is not already type 2 action designated by the state. So there's some limitation, like for instance, development of a single family home is a type 2 action. You couldn't put that on the list. But you could, and it might be worth exploring further to see kind of what the contours of the 2 lists, the type 1, the type 2 unlisted are, and where maybe you could find some area of regulation that you could locally designate as type 1. I mentioned Lakewood Meadows earlier. That was a conservation or cluster subdivision years ago, but I'm not sure if it's a particularly good one. I mean, it really consumes all of the land without too much meaningful conservation land. So I think better conservation subdivisions, potentially even Pierce Brook, right? They're not really great examples of conservation subdivision, at least as far as it relates to preserving any existing agricultural land there. So I think the better conservation subdivision design could be helpful. Infrastructure investments, water, sewer, roadways, particularly high-speed roadways, make sure that they're in areas that you want to see developed. When you're getting grant funding for applying new or installing new water infrastructure, usually you have to adopt some sort of lateral restrictions. Make sure that those are strictly applied to reduce the interest in development in farmlands, right? Low-speed rural roads, one, makes people safer, but two, it reduces development interest in those areas if you can't easily get to them or you can't speed through them. And then another good thing is just to update the local planning documents. The ag plan was last updated in 2018. Comp plan was done in 2021. Comp plan in 2021 had measurable items for like impacts to agriculture or how you would track success. One thing the committee can probably do is start trying to track those measurables or at least update them and see if we've made any progress, or maybe where in the town development has occurred over time and what pattern it has, and see if you can find patterns that will say, okay, this is maybe what one of the issues is, or we're still running into this issue and here's how we're going to address it. So definitely take a look at the old comp plan and see if you can update any of those measurables. That's it. Please let me know if you have any questions. Happy to talk.
So what is the time frame that we're talking about to suggest changes? What is the town board trying to do? Is this something that it's a 2026 project, or is this something that, hey, let's bring this into mind of people to maybe create a program down the road? What is the status, or what is the pressure on this type of changes?
I don't know that there is any. I don't think there's any defined project right now. You know, I at least was asked to join you all to have a conversation. It wasn't as though there was a project in mind saying, oh, we got to, get them on board for this or that. So I don't think there's anything really there. I think that what this would end up being is you all potentially finding something that you want to take on or want the town to take on, and then advocating for that, and then maybe that becomes a more defined project. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, it does.
It's kind of like the agricultural overlay district that the Ag Committee championed. You guys worked with Doug Finch when he was here and put together that, and then that went up to the Ordinance Committee and the Town Board and was adopted. And that was to basically take it out of planning board control to allow extensions of the sewer district and water district into the prime ag land area. So it was to try and slow down development. So you couldn't put housing developments in there, but you could still put like single family homes and stuff. But that was one thing. You guys just took that on and did that. And I think that's kind of what any of these things would be.
I do remember pretty early, and I want to say 2018, 2019, the discussion of the R2 validity came up. And we spent a couple of meetings discussing if IR2 was good for agriculture or counterproductive. So I can understand the point that you're making, that it doesn't help protect land because it's too small for a farm and too large for a chunk of land to be lost for a house.
Yep. I think, part of it, the idea maybe when it was created, one was it marginally increases the cost of building housing there, a few $1,000s for the extra acre of land. But it also potentially reduces overall development density if a property were to go through a major subdivision process. So, if a if a landowner of a large chunk wanted to develop a large subdivision at a 2 acre per dwelling unit density, they'd get less return. Like they couldn't sell it for as much money as they could for if it was a higher density. And so in that sense, it's a disincentive on landowners to sell the property for a major subdivision. But I also think that that's less of that concern is probably more or better mitigated through where infrastructure is, because you wouldn't see a major subdivision like that where there's no sewer. You'd really only see it where there is sewer. So I think it's better mitigated through infrastructure investment and availability than it is through the zoning in this case.
Yeah. And if you're going to lose a 35-acre lot, you may as well just cram as many people as you can, so you lose less 30-acre lots later on.
Yeah, and you're getting at, you relieve more of the development pressure, so you'd see less desire to demand or desire to develop elsewhere in the town.
Now, I know conservation subdivisions can be used for agricultural purposes. We haven't seen any of that really. Or does Piercebrook have some? I don't know, but how would you improve that to help agriculture?
Let me see if I can pull something up real quick.
I know on the recent one we saw proposed, from the ECB point of view, I had issues because it really wasn't
That's
a good example of conserving land.
is that Ashton Place?
Yes.
Yeah. I try to give them at least a little bit of grace because I think that the scenic viewshed overlay law, at least the point where it says like every lot has to be 1 acre,
Yeah.
is a really bad law. The SCR1 was initially created with the intent of doing conservation subdivisions at 1 acre per dwelling unit. And so to then make it so 1 acre per dwelling unit overall, not 1 acre per each dwelling unit. And so they've kind of flipped the SCR1 on its head and said now it's got to be 1 acre, which again consumes more land, and you really can't do a conservation subdivision at 1 acre per lot, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, sorry, what am I looking here? Piercebrook.
Because I mean, if you had some of that along with housing, you would keep, some agricultural use as well as the agricultural, landscape that people find appealing too.
Yeah. And
The
so
only way that I can see that working is if the law says that for an agricultural conservation subdivision, each lot has to be a tenth of for every acre devoted to it, a tenth of it goes for housing and 9/10 of it goes for a common agricultural area or contiguous agricultural area. So that you put all the houses in 10% of the lot and leave 90% of the lot to be open lot for agriculture. That's kind of the only thing that I can think that will actually help.
And for Piercebrook, they have this long winding road that comes through it. So for one thing, windy roads are not good for conservation subdivisions because they just consume extra land to get to an ultimate destination. It's again not dense at all. All these lots you could probably fit in just this area with a different arrangement and retain the rest of it for agriculture or something to that effect. Because of the way that they developed in such a sprawling fashion, you end up disturbing more land and you need wider or bigger stormwater facilities. So then that again consumes more land. But a lot of it comes down to, I don't know how to necessarily describe it, but just placing the same number of units in less space.
Okay.
You could also use narrower roadways, again, consuming less land. And then part of it too, like when we do our conservation analysis, like I think that the Ashton Place one was better than in the past, but just a much more detailed conservation analysis. And then providing like the whole process sort of needs to start a little bit sooner, or the way that like Ashton Place went through a number of sketch plans to get to where it is. But it needs to start even like prior to that with the actual analysis, conservation analysis. And then before any sketch plans are laid out, say, okay, here's all of our environmental features. And then you kind of start laying it out, but everybody's got their concept design in the sketch plan before they come to the board. And then their conservation analysis is basically like, how can we, fudge this to make it fit how we want to? It's like, okay, that's not really the way you should be doing it, because there's no real interest in conservation there.
I wish I knew about this. Like, I mean, out back when Peace Brook came, because I feel like that would have been a good
Yeah.
way to have that whole conservation.
Pierce Brook was probably tricky, partly because they had a subdivision approved back in like 2001.
Okay.
And so there was probably less ability to say like, oh, we're gonna develop in this way, because then the developer said, well, we already got this approval to develop in this other bad fashion. So I wonder if it's in here. Anyways, I'm not sure if I'll be able to pull it up. Doesn't look like it's on here anymore. Yeah. Okay.
Those type of
Never mind.
approvals don't have a deadline. Be built by the or
After it was filed with the county, my understanding was that no, essentially they had the preliminary subdivision approval, and as long as they came in with a final subdivision approval that was in substantial conformance to that, couldn't really say no, unless the planning board probably could have made some sort of finding that, changes or like substantial changes have been made to the surrounding circumstances. Maybe I'm not as familiar with the legal requirements there, but it's possible that there's some avenue there. But effectively, they had a prelim subdivision signed, filed, and as long as the final subdivision came in that was substantially conforming to that, they could build it.
But potentially that would be a way to make some dense housing and have some agricultural land preserved, because it
Yeah.
is part of the conservation subdivision
Yeah.
code.
And I wonder too if there's an opportunity to use incentive zoning for that purpose, or yeah, maybe there is a way to do it through like incentive zoning. But these are they're difficult processes because they require the town board, the planning board to be strict negotiators and like to use the leverage that they have. And sometimes it's difficult for planning boards that don't necessarily want to push too hard, or town boards that don't necessarily want to push too hard. So it's difficult there, but I think that they probably could if they had a vision in mind and really wanted to push for it. What, like, as it relates to agriculture in the town, what do you think are like the biggest threats to them? Or like opportunities, at least certainly as it relates to like that on the economic side?
the land price is definitely a big one, especially for transitioning or for transition, expansion, new entries. Land price is a big barrier.
Yeah. Yeah. Like
overall, the size of the lots that we have are already not conducive to efficient large crop farming. So you're already limited by the equipment you're going to have based on some of the lot sizes we have, but we cannot do anything about that. We cannot increase them anymore. We can just try to keep them from getting smaller.
Yeah. It really seems like to me that it needs to there needs to be a much larger regional state push potentially to encourage housing production because that's where probably the main driver of the increase in the cost of land. You know, what you can do with that land, the value of it, it's probably related to housing, potentially farming. But you know, if we can start building more housing to relieve the price of housing, or the demand for housing, hopefully it can start doing that, but that can really only happen at a higher scale. You know, the town can only do so much to relieve development pressure, but you can't build all of the region's housing in the town of Canandaigua.
Uptown is an
Nor we want
opportunity.
to.
Yeah. Wait, sorry. Kimmy said Uptown is an opportunity.
Yeah, for dense housing.
Yeah. I have my issues with that design, but overall I think it's a
Yeah.
good project.
Oh, I just meant the Uptown area in general.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, absolutely. And I
Eh,
think that, you know, proactively it might be a good thing too to see like to make sure that the development regulations there are in line with, you know, what makes sense, you know, whether the boundaries are appropriate or is enough of the area in the form-based code district. Does the form-based code district provide clear direction, good rules for it? I think overall it's very flexible.
Strictly
Eric,
agriculturally speaking, it is better to develop the south end of the town that is hilly and more broken down parcels than the north part where you can have flatter fields. But
Yeah.
that trend I think already shifted. And as you said, close proximity to Rochester is a bigger incentive than having to create traffic all the way to the south end towards Naples.
Yeah.
Erica, Tim has to get going, but he did want to say a couple words to you. Go ahead, Timmy.
Yeah, Eric. Hey, just wanted to thank you for your time this evening. I
Of
look
course.
to hearing more about this topic in the future. There's a lot of relevant information that I hope leads to more fruitful discussion. And of course, looking for a way to preserve more farmland in the future and also improve town. You know, I want, you know, more economic opportunity, but also more farmland preservation. Yeah, I've got to get going now, but just wanted to say thank you for your time, and I look forward to revisiting this conversation in the future.
Great. Thanks, Tim.
Bye, Tim.
Alrighty, we'll see you.
See ya.
now this committee is asked about TDRs many times. Do you know much about how those are set up and how those work?
I know a little bit about them, but I've never been intimately involved with them. I know it's like it's difficult to, you know, find what the price is, I guess, of like development or extra development rights to some degree. And in some cases, I can't remember if they were required to find like the buyer or the person whose development rights they're purchasing, right? And so you have to, in order for somebody who's like trying to purchase development rights, the developer, they've got to also find that third party, I guess. And so it becomes sort of a coordination problem in the TDR, which makes it a little bit unwieldy. And so, you know, I think that if you have effectively like an account that one party can put money into, the developer can put money into to basically purchase additional rights, kind of like an incentive zoning, a fee and
Mhm.
to purchase additional rights. And then, and so they don't have to try to find that third party, and that you don't necessarily run into the coordination problem. The town could then utilize that money to do the purchasing, similar to how PDR functions now.
Yeah.
So I think that oftentimes TDRs have tried to like take care of that whole process at once between the developer and potential farmer, where it might be able to kind of smooth the process out potentially if the town just had the town was kind of like the bank there, and the money was kind of the fungible asset that then they could figure out who the sender was.
Because I know that's something this committee has mentioned in one way or another. Maybe not,
Yeah.
saying TDR, but they're basically looking for funds to try and help preserve
Yeah.
farmland. So
And I think it makes sense. I would just say like when I was involved with it a little bit with the town, it didn't, obviously didn't come to fruition, but there was like they were looking at studies with it back in the day. There was this thought that like we would or the town would kind of reduce the development potential of properties that it like wanted to see developed below maybe where it wanted to see developed, to try to encourage developers to buy that last piece of development rights to get it there. And I would just say, don't do that. Set your rules to where you want to see them and allow developers to purchase beyond that if that's what they want. Don't prohibit what you want to see to try to extort is maybe not the right word, but extort the money out of developers, so that you don't end up with like a net worse off community just because you were trying to get something from a developer. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if anybody else is familiar with the backstory on the call, but yeah.
okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I know it's a topic that's come up many times here.
Yeah. It'd be
Does
cool.
that
And
make
from what I can tell, it hasn't happened in a lot of places, probably because it is just difficult to some degree. But I think that you could do it maybe on the more incentive zoning side if you get people to pay a fee that's then held into account that then the town could then offer up for preservation.
Okay.
So Eric, this is Alan Taylor. We're a relatively small committee with 5 people. I'm trying to digest what you're telling us here, but I'm trying to think how can you kind of work best with our committee? It seems like we need to have an objective or a goal. I feel that it should be more ag centric for our overall mission of the preservation of the farmland, rather than be concerned about like how lots should be split up for the number of housing. It's all important, but I think we need to focus our attention on one thing, but something that it is doable, that we can really make an impact. So again, I know that I just scattered a lot of things out there, but I guess I'd like to get your feeling of one, how you could interface, work with our committee, and then what would be, say, a realistic goal. And we've kicked around a few things, but what do you think would be kind of a realistic target for us to go after?
Yeah. So my involvement, you know, we're with my work at MRB, effectively my time is the cost here. There'd have to be some sort of project agreement between MRB and the town, to as far as like what my role is there. So that as far as my involvement, that's kind of it. Um, uh, to the extent I can just offer advice, I'm happy to do that too, but I can't be heavily involved really unless there's some sort of project agreement between the town and MRB. Does that part make sense? And then I'll address the other part.
Sure. I
Okay.
think we kind of knew that even last year as we started
Yeah.
thinking about having you come in and speak to the group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's as far as like a first actionable item that I think that the committee could address is probably like updating some of the measurable items in the comprehensive plan, um, and just trying to get a better grasp of the problems to be solved right now. And that could be a good segue or lead into the next step there, um, as far as like a more concrete task to address. I think that, since the AR2 is really for agriculture, I understand what you're trying to say, that you don't want to focus so much on development like outside of ag areas to some degree. That maybe even suggesting residents to AR2 is more in line with what you're talking about there. Um, Setting up a PDR program, I think that you could, or a TDR program, it's maybe a little bit technical. You'd certainly need some outside help, but a lot of it is just identifying what the most valuable change would be and trying to advocate that, or what the most valuable change would be and where it's at least relatively within your locus of control. Maybe the most valuable change is, the state limiting density, or limiting density restrictions. Okay, that's great, but if you can't get it passed, it's not worth working on. So, try to identify what the problem is, what's well within your locus of control that you can reasonably focus on, and then go there. But I would start by touching on these measurables, trying to see what's changed over time. Try to figure out if there's a particular area of interest, or area that's at risk, maybe that you don't want it to be. And then if you do find an area that's at risk, then you can focus on a particular, like a much more narrow problem to solve. So I guess if I had one suggestion in that sense, it would just be, try to identify a specific problem that then can lead you to an easier solution, right? So you're not try to narrow your scope from something broad.
No, I think that what we need is something is realistic, and I think what you said is kind of right on of what we envision our committee's capability of doing and what impact we can do.
And I think too, like one reason I pointed out these measurables is because this data is pretty easily available. I think that you can get it either from, the county, the assessor, or the Census Bureau or the Department of Labor, right. So like they're all readily accessible data sources that you can put this together. That it would be a relatively quick thing, I think, to do this part. And then maybe some of that you'd have to do a little bit of like analysis and like GIS to see like where maybe shifts have been in, acreage type, as far as like where land changed from farmland to residential or vacant, whatever. But broadly, I think you guys could handle these measurables.
That's good. And I think, as we have, our next monthly meeting, then we can kind of get our heads wrapped around this, and we've had time to digest this and talk through as a committee of how we want to proceed with this. But really appreciate your, as Tim said, really appreciate your time and your presentation too.
Yeah.
So it's nicely organized and presented. Thank you.
Yeah. And I guess one other thing too, some of these things where it's like acres and agriculture production, number and size of farms, possibly you could track it, or you could measure the impacts to agriculture for the different projects that come before you. So presumably every more major, anything with site plan and new house development, something will come to you all. And you could keep a running tally of impacts to agriculture from development that comes before you. That's probably a relatively easy one. It's passive in the sense those projects are coming to you. You don't necessarily have to seek them out. You just have to track them over time.
And from your minutes and things like that, you could probably go back and if you wanted to go back farther than just, going forward,
Mhm.
you could probably figure out some of that too.
Yeah.
I would say, one thing I've noticed too, like in working with the planning board, is a lot of times we're trying to limit the impacts of ag on a project that's already before you with a development proposal. And it seems to me that at that point, it's too late.
Mhm.
And so you really got to get ahead of development and make sure that the rules are set in the appropriate way, make sure that the infrastructure is in place in a way that limits that development. You're really trying to focus more on setting the stage for development in a way that reduces impact to agriculture, not, you know, trying to limit the impact from the actors.
Mhm.
That does make a lot of sense, and it does put some perspective on what we have to do. Well, I definitely appreciate that. I will have to step off here as well, but there's definitely a lot of talking points, and there's a couple of ideas in my mind about maybe some of the budget money that we have could be used for some of those analyses. So I will bring that up coming up in other meetings, but there's been years that we don't have a clear objective for the budgets that we have, and I think that there is value on some of these analyses and trying to get advice on consulting on how to get ahead of the pressure. So that might be a worthy cause of some of the funds we have. Thank you, everyone. Sorry I couldn't be there. I will keep trying to be in person for future meetings.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Fernando.
Thanks.
Yep.
Nice talking to you.
Thanks so much, Eric. I don't know if anybody else has any questions, comments.
No.
I really enjoyed the presentation. If are we able to access this to like reflect on and look at it, and then that way we can discuss it
Yeah, I can send it out. Yeah, I'll send it to the email chain that Kim had sent with the agenda earlier.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, just because Timmy wasn't able to see it, and that way we can go back on it and look at it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's no problem.
Thank you.
And then, if you have any questions on it, I really I just sort of threw it together, and so if there's any additional resources that you're looking for, feel free to ask. If I have anything, I'll share it with you, where I developed that from or resources, I'll share it with you. But just don't hesitate to ask any questions. I'm happy to help.
I think for me, my major goal is a lot of times our responses are the same. And I want to make sure that I guess we have a little bit more information other than just our, oh yeah, this is a detriment to agricultural land. Like just having more of a reason as to why, I think is what our goal is, as to why this is a detriment. And go from there.
Okay.
Um,
I'm gonna think on that a little bit too.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll send that presentation out, and if anybody has any questions, just let me know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice seeing everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
You have one.
Are we able to vote on
Yeah,
this,
just
Kim?
two
'Cause
of
it's
us
just
now,
me and
so
Aaron now.
Yeah.
I think we probably need to table that for this one and pick that one up
Let
next time.
let me look to see what's happening with
Okay.
that one.
All right.
So this is a subdivision.
Yeah.
So one of the things, and it's the reason why I asked about the conservation subdivision. I mean, subdivision is one of those things that comes before you see the site plans
Okay.
and the development is happening.
Mhm.
Usually the development is probably planned when they're wanting to do subdivisions,
Right.
but if you kind of look up the chain a little bit, it might help.
Mhm.
That's why I was asking
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
Because I think if you guys could make use of if conservation subdivisions were better
Mhm.
than they are now, I think that might be a help.
Mhm.
I really like that idea of the conservation subdivision. And again,
Yeah.
that was something that like we knew about when they were starting the Pierce Brook, because that would have been a good area,
Yeah.
a trial type area to see if okay, well, what can we do to work out the kinks and stuff? But I mean that if that was already in the works in 2001, if I recall correctly, I was 5, so I couldn't really think about it then. So, but I'm sure with the developments that are going to be coming with the development pressure that we have at Canandaigua, with it becoming such a popular area now, that perhaps this is something that we can think about in the future, especially with like the surrounding area around Pierce Brook. I mean, now that they have that one development, who knows how more are going to be in that generalized area. So,
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I like the idea of smaller um, parcels. Because yeah, a farmer could sell off a little, a 1 acre or half acre or whatever. And if you don't have the infrastructure of sewer and water, you can't put a housing development in.
Yeah.
That's a showstopper for that. So it is something to think about that too. So this is a subdivision. It's of an existing. I don't think we reviewed this one in ECB. So it's on Brickyard Road, which that was one of the places that Eric was looking at the different lot sizes. And it looks like they want to make this into 2 lots, if I got this correct.
Yeah. That's what the write-up has.
So they want to turn a 2.3 acre parcel into 2 lots that are just over 1 acre. And when you look at Encore, it's already mowed lawn.
okay. I mean, with it, again, I'm not sure if we can even vote on this since it's just me and Alan. Now, I mean, our first one since we had the quorum, but now with it just being the two of
Yeah.
us.
I don't think it's going to be, it's
And-
not farmland now, so it's not something uber critical, I
Right.
think.
Mhm.
That's all I was trying to get to.
And it says here that it's in an industrial zoning district, so do we even have input into to those?
There could be farmland
Okay,
in an
okay.
industrial zone.
All right.
Just judging by the size of it, I mean, I
If
think
you want to make a comment, it could just be a comment and nothing official.
I'll make a comment that it's not detrimental to a loss of agricultural land,
I would support that as well.
with it being with it already being in an industrial zone, also with it being such a small acreage.
Mhm.
So, yeah. It's not like there's really going to be impacting any NRI features, like
Right.
forest or anything like that. It's
Yeah.
just cutting a
But-
mowed place in half.
Mhm.
Well, again, I'm sorry for not being in person for this. I just didn't want to leave home.
No, that's quite okay.
I will see everybody at the next one in March.
That sounds good.
Okay, Sam, take care.
Thank you. You guys have a good night.
All right.
Thank you, you as well.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay. I will get the technology worked out for this.
Yeah.